The date was May 14, 1981. The town of Hannibal, Missouri, slept beneath a sky thick with river fog. Porch lights flickered behind lace curtains. Dogs barked in the distance, their calls echoing off clapboard houses and weathered barns. A single street lamp on Redfern Avenue buzzed above the intersection, its glow caught in the branches of a sycamore tree. And in a modest two-story home at 46 Redfern, Margaret Avery kissed her children goodnight for what she believed would be the 1,000th time. The triplets Eli, Sarah, and Noah were 8 years old that spring. They shared a room upstairs. Their beds were lined up like boats. One by the window, one by the wall, one near the door. 3 beds, 3 stories, 3 heartbeats that by morning would vanish into silence. Margaret remembers the pajamas. Eli wore the blue ones with the rocket ship. Sarah had her pink cotton gown with the frayed sleeve. Noah refused to take off his rain boots, even in bed. She let him keep them on. It had rained earlier. The garden was still damp. At 8:14 p.m. she turned off the light. At 8:17 she walked down the stairs. At 8:20 the back screen door creaked shut. That was the last noise she heard from upstairs. She poured herself a cup of chamomile tea. She turned on the radio Patsy Cline. She folded a towel, then another. Then she fell asleep on the couch. When she woke, the clock on the wall read 2:36 a.m. The room was cold. The tea had gone untouched. The house was still. Too still. Margaret climbed the stairs slowly, like she was carrying something invisible. She opened the door to the triplets' room, and for a moment she thought it was a dream. The covers were pulled back, the beds empty, rain boots on the floor. The window was slightly open. The night air breathed through the room like it belonged there. Margaret screamed. The neighbors heard. One called the sheriff. Another grabbed a flashlight. By 3:15 a.m., 2 squad cars were parked in front of the Avery house. An officer stood at the curb, another in the backyard. But no one found footprints. No signs of forced entry. No blood. No sound. The only thing left behind was Sarah's stuffed bear sitting on the windowsill, facing out. By dawn, search parties had begun to form. Volunteers with hound dogs, ATVs, binoculars. They combed the banks of the Mississippi River. They checked barns, basements, abandoned mills. Nothing. No trace. No note. No witnesses. It was as if the Avery triplets had been erased. That morning, a newspaper boy tossed the Hannibal Courier-Post onto a porch 5 blocks away. Its headline read, "City Council Debates Pool Budget." By the next morning the headlines would change forever. 3 children missing in Hannibal. Triplets disappear in the night. A town grips its heart. Margaret didn't sleep again for 6 days. She gave police the names of everyone who had ever entered the house. She begged the press for help. She refused to change the sheets in their beds. She kept the lights on night and day. And still nothing came. No body, no ransom, no goodbye. Just that breeze through the open window and a bear watching the street. It would be 30 years before Margaret Avery would learn the truth. And when she did, it was buried in her own backyard. A house remembers even when no one else does. After the cameras left and the headlines faded, the Avery home remained exactly where it had always been sitting at the bend of Redfern Avenue, flanked by cottonwoods and a rusting fence. For the rest of that summer in 1981, the house stood with its windows shut tight, curtains drawn like eyelids, holding its breath. Inside, every room felt too big, every silence too loud. Margaret Avery lived in that silence like a ghost. She moved through the house without sound. She didn't sweep the floors. She didn't open the windows. She stopped answering the phone, because the house had changed. It had gone from being a place that echoed with 3 sets of laughter to a place where the air clung to the wallpaper like sorrow. The triplets' room upstairs remained untouched. 3 beds, 3 pillows, 3 pairs of shoes neatly tucked underneath. The calendar on the wall still read May 1981. A paper chain they had made in spring counting down to summer break still hung across the bookshelf. Eli had made it red and blue. Sarah had added glitter to hers. Noah's was crooked and he didn't care. Now the chain just sagged in the heat. Margaret would sometimes stand in the doorway for hours, staring at it, not crying, just staring, as if waiting for one of them to finish it. The town of Hannibal moved on, as towns do. At church, people offered casseroles and condolences. At the grocery store, someone left flowers by the register. There were whispers in the post office, rumors at the barber shop. Some people said the children had drowned, others said they were taken. A few suggested Margaret had gone mad, but no one said anything to her face. The local police exhausted their leads within weeks. The river had been searched 3 times. Tips dried up. The FBI moved on. Margaret was told to try to heal. She nodded, then went home to sit in her kitchen, listening to nothing. Each morning she laid out 3 bowls of cereal. She poured 3 glasses of orange juice. She set out spoons and napkins. And when the sun rose untouched, she quietly cleaned it all up again. The rooms began to smell like lavender and dust. That summer the garden grew wild. Without Eli pulling weeds, or Sarah arranging flowers in old pickle jars, or Noah stomping in puddles with his rain boots, the backyard began to swell with overgrowth. Vines crept along the fence. Ivy curled around the shed. The gate began to rot on its hinges. Still, Margaret never stopped locking it. Every night, click. As July turned to August, Margaret began writing letters. She didn't know why. Just started. Each letter was addressed to one of the triplets, each on the same kind of lined paper they used for homework. She wrote about the garden, the weather, the shape of the clouds. She wrote about their favorite songs playing on the radio. She wrote about nothing. Then she folded them into thirds and slid them beneath their pillows. By the end of August, there were dozens of letters, yellowing, unread, tucked beneath the silence of that room. Margaret never mailed them. She never showed them to anyone. But each Tuesday, she wrote 3 more. It became a ritual, a rhythm, a way to measure time when time had stopped. In late summer, a man came to check the meter on the side of the house. He knocked, waited, then walked around the back. Later, he told police the garden had made him uneasy, like someone was there just not visible, like the yard was full of things not being said. By September, Margaret stopped attending church. Her pew sat empty. The pastor visited once, bringing a box of canned goods and a verse from Isaiah. Margaret thanked him, then gently closed the door and slid the deadbolt across. Autumn came early that year. The leaves turned gold and red, and the rooms in the Avery house darkened with the days. In November, the electric bill went unpaid. Then the phone line. Then the insurance. Margaret began to burn candles in the kitchen, not out of desperation, out of habit. The house had become a shrine, but no one came to pray. Then one day, in December, she received a letter from a woman in Ohio, a stranger. It read, "I saw your story. I lost my son in '76. They said I should move on. I never did. I just learned to move around it. Your children will find their way back. Some stories don't end. They just get quiet for a while." Margaret read that letter once, then folded it gently and placed it inside Sarah's dresser drawer, beneath a row of mismatched socks. She didn't respond, but it stayed there all the same. That winter, snow fell heavy on Hannibal. Icicles formed along the roofline. The garden disappeared under white. And still Margaret kept the room warm. She left the radiator on. She shook the quilts each morning. She fluffed the pillows. She turned the stuffed bear on the windowsill to face the beds, just in case. By the time spring returned in 1982, Margaret Avery had not spoken a full sentence to another human being in 6 months. But she had written 124 letters, and not one word of them guessed what truly happened that night. Not one sentence predicted the thing that would be unearthed 3 decades later, because what Margaret didn't know, what no one did, was that the house itself wasn't just mourning. It was remembering, and it was waiting for someone to finally listen. The first 48 hours were supposed to matter most. That's what the experts said. After that, chances dropped, leads cooled, evidence vanished. People forgot. But in Hannibal, Missouri, the first 48 hours were quiet. Too quiet. Deputy Sheriff Warren Hulse was the first officer to enter the Avery house after Margaret's 3:17 a.m. call. He was 28 years old, 6 months on the force, and still called every woman ma'am. When he stepped into the Triplets' bedroom, he paused. It wasn't what he saw. It was what he didn't see. There were no signs of struggle, no broken glass, no muddy footprints. The window was open, but the sill was clean. The sheets were turned back like someone had simply gotten up to use the bathroom and never returned. The only thing Deputy Hulse noted as odd was the alignment of the bear on the windowsill. It was just sitting there, he later testified, facing the yard, like it was waiting for something. A detective from St. Louis arrived before sunrise. His name was Charles Kinney, and he didn't like small towns. He said so to the chief under his breath, just before walking the perimeter with a cigarette between his fingers. The fence was intact. The gate was locked from the inside. No drag marks in the soil. No tire tracks. No hair. No blood. It didn't make sense. By 8 a.m., the Avery house was filled with uniforms, flash bulbs, latex gloves. Reporters gathered across the street. One local cameraman shot footage of Margaret leaning against the porch post, arms crossed, eyes vacant. She didn't cry. She didn't blink. She just kept staring down the street. They searched the entire block that day. Every backyard, every storm drain, every woodshed, crawl space, and garage. They knocked on doors. They asked the same questions. Did you see anything unusual last night? Did you hear anything between 8 p.m. and 3 a.m.? Do you know the Avery children? No one had answers, but one neighbor, Mrs. Alice Denham, 2 doors down, said something strange. I saw a light in their garden just before midnight, flickering. I thought maybe they left a lamp on. Detective Kinney asked why she hadn't called it in. People keep their lights on. It didn't seem strange at the time. It's only strange now. They checked the garden. No lamp. No flashlight. No sign of a disturbance. The soil was soft from rain, but unmarked. Every window. Every door. Locked. Unbroken. It was like the children had evaporated. The FBI was brought in on day 3. They set up base at the sheriff's office. They interviewed Margaret for 5 hours. She answered every question calmly, repeatedly, consistently. Yes, she put them to bed at 8:15. Yes, she locked the doors. No, she didn't see or hear anything. They asked about the father. He had died 3 years early accident at the mill. No custody battles, no strange relatives, no one with motive or access. By day 5, the search radius extended to 15 miles. Helicopters scanned the river. Divers went in twice. Nothing. No shoes. No clothing. No bodies. Just nothing. The press speculated wildly. One headline read, "Were they taken through the walls?" Another, "Town haunted by triplets vanishing." Reporters swarmed Hannibal. They asked townspeople about cults, tunnels, devil worship, underground rings. Locals shut their doors. Margaret stayed inside. On the 7th day, Detective Kinney walked the Avery house one final time before transferring the case to cold file status. He opened every drawer, checked every closet, measured the window again. It was 18 inches wide, big enough for a child, too small for an adult, maybe. He stared at the bear on the windowsill. Then he walked out, and for the next 30 years no one looked inside that room with intention again. Not until the garden started whispering. Hannibal, Missouri, had always been a quiet town. But after May 14, 1981, it wasn't the same kind of quiet. It was a silence that pressed into your bones. A silence that followed you into the grocery store, into church pews, into living rooms and gas station lines. The kind of silence that made people speak softer, or not at all. It wasn't just that 3 children had vanished. It was how they vanished. Because if 3 kids could disappear from their own beds without a trace, without a sound, then what else could slip through the seams of this town? So Hannibal did what many towns do when something terrible happens. It buried it. With casseroles. With prayer circles. with small talk, and slowly it began to lock its mouth. The Avery house became something people avoided. Even the mailman left letters at the edge of the walkway. Children crossed the street rather than walk past it. Teenagers dared each other to touch the fence. Few did. To some it became haunted. To others cursed. And to everyone else it became something to forget. For a while it worked. Years passed. New families moved in. Shops opened, closed, reopened. But the stories never really left. People whispered them in back booths at the diner, during late-night shifts at the mill, at sleepovers and Halloween parties. One story said the children had drowned in the river and that their ghosts still called from the fog. Another claimed a man in a brown sedan had been seen parked outside their home that night twice. No one ever found the sedan, or agreed if it had even existed. Some whispered about Margaret Avery, how she must have known more than she said, how a mother couldn't possibly sleep through that kind of thing, how she was too calm, too quiet, or too broken to ever make sense. By the late 80s, she was rarely seen in town. She didn't go to church anymore, didn't shop locally, didn't wave at the neighbors. But the lights in the upstairs bedroom stayed on, every night, for years. And every year on May 14th, Margaret walked to the end of her driveway just before midnight. She stood beneath the street lamp, holding 3 white carnations, and waited. Sometimes a neighbor would see her, but no one approached, not after the first time. In 1983, a woman named Carol Monroe from the PTA stopped to speak to her. She placed a hand on Margaret's shoulder and said, "They're with God now." Margaret didn't answer. She just looked down at the flowers, then turned and walked back inside. The next year, no one came near her. By 1991, the town barely mentioned the Triplets. The police case file sat in a beige cabinet under a layer of dust, labeled Avery Children, Open, Unsolved. Beside it, a cassette tape of Margaret's original call. No one played it anymore. The only ones who asked were out-of-towners. A college student from Kansas once tried to write a paper on the case. She knocked on doors, asked too many questions. 3 days later, she packed up and left without finishing her interviews. She told her roommate the people in Hannibal acted like the kids had never existed. Even the local news stations stopped airing anniversary segments. The footage felt stale, too sad, too strange, too unresolved. No one wanted to remember a story that never got an ending. But not everyone forgot. Inside a modest white house near the old train tracks, an aging librarian named Pauline Triggs kept every article ever written about the Triplets. Clippings yellowed with time, photos taped and retaped into a scrapbook that grew thicker each year. She never had children of her own. But she remembered Margaret from church, and something about the case never sat right. In 1999, she wrote a letter to the Hannibal Police Department. Has the shed ever been searched thoroughly? Could someone have returned to the scene months later? Would anyone have checked for shallow soil disruption? She never received a reply. In 2003, she sent a second letter, this one to the county sheriff. Again, no answer. So she stopped writing, but she didn't stop watching. Each May, she walked by the Avery house. She noticed the gate always stayed closed, that the garden was still tended though no one saw Margaret do it, that the upstairs lights still burned, steady as ever. It wasn't much, but in a town that had gone mute, Pauline was one of the last who still listened. Then, in 2011, something unexpected happened. Margaret Avery, after nearly 30 years of silence, called the county office. Not to talk about the case, not to reopen it. She called to ask about soil permits. She wanted to dig in her backyard. They asked why. She said, "I think it's time." It had been exactly 10,957 days since the night the Avery triplets vanished. And on the morning of the 4th of June, 2011, a Saturday, Margaret Avery walked into the backyard of her home on Redfern Avenue with a garden spade in one hand and a folded paper in the other. The paper was a permit. The spade was for something else. The neighbors didn't notice. She chose early hours, just after dawn, when the street was still and the robins hadn't finished their song. The morning dew shimmered on the overgrown grass, and the shed at the edge of the yard sat as it always had, crooked, quiet, forgotten. Margaret hadn't stepped inside the shed in years, maybe since the early 90s. The lock was rusted shut, the key long gone. She could have called someone, a handyman, the city, the police, but she didn't want help. Not now. She took a bolt cutter from the basement and sliced through the lock like it was thread. The metal dropped with a hollow thud against the wooden step. Then she opened the door. The smell hit her first. Dust, soil, iron, and something else. Something that didn't belong in a tool shed. She didn't step inside. Not yet. Instead, she walked 6 steps to the left, just beside the rhubarb bushes, to a patch of dirt she hadn't touched in decades. There was no marker, no sign. But she remembered the dream, the one she'd had 3 nights in a row, the one with the flickering light in the garden, the one where Sarah kept whispering, "It's beneath the box, Mama." She didn't believe in dreams. Not for 30 years. But she also didn't believe in coincidence anymore. So she began to dig. The first few inches were just soil, damp but loose. Then clay. Then something hard. She thought it might be a rock. It wasn't. It was metal. Margaret dropped to her knees and scraped away the dirt with her hands, slow and careful. What she uncovered was a small tin box, no bigger than a lunch pail, wrapped in what looked like a child's raincoat. Blue, faded, with a name tag sewn into the collar. Noah Avery. Her breath caught. Her hands shook. She didn't open the box right away. She placed it gently beside her and kept digging. Within the hour she found 2 more bundles. Another coat, this one pink with flowers. Sarah's. Then a red hoodie with the patch of a rocket ship. Eli. Inside each was a sealed tin. And inside each tin was something no one had seen in 30 years. A cassette tape, a note, and a photograph. She took them all inside, set them on the kitchen table, then sat there for hours, not moving, not eating, not crying, just staring. At 4:46 p.m., she called the county sheriff's office. When the deputy answered, she said 4 words. "I found their voices." The line went silent, then static, then confusion. By 6 p.m., the house was surrounded. This time, the uniform stayed outside. No one touched the table. No one interrupted Margaret. She handed the tapes over in silence. But she kept the coats. The next day, the FBI reopened the case. The shed was searched. The backyard excavated. Ground-penetrating radar was brought in. They didn't find bones. They didn't find bodies. But they found something else. Buried beneath the floorboards of the shed was an old corroded Polaroid camera. Its lens cracked. The strap still looped in a child's knot. It took experts 3 days to recover the film. It took Margaret 30 years to look at what they found. The first photo was dark, blurry, but in the center was a clear shape. 3 children, sitting on a wooden floor. Hands held, eyes open, staring directly into the lens. One was missing a shoe. One clutched a bear. One wore a pair of blue rain boots. No date. No caption, no explanation, just a single moment, frozen in silence. Then came the tape. Authorities didn't release the contents publicly, but they described the voice as childlike, urgent, and rehearsed. They said it sounded like a boy, maybe Eli. He spoke directly into the recorder. "We didn't go far. We're not lost. We're waiting. Don't forget." Followed by the sound of someone shushing. Then footsteps. Then nothing. That night, Margaret slept in their room for the first time since 1981. She turned off the hallway light. She placed the 3 coats over each bed. And for the first time in 3 decades she dreamed of them smiling. Not scared. Not cold. Just waiting. Some echoes don't fade. They just wait to be heard again. The FBI lab in St. Louis received the tapes on a Monday. 3 cassettes, each labeled with the names of the triplets handwritten in pencil, faded but still legible. Eli, Sarah, Noah. The technicians didn't expect much. Time erases tape. Moisture, heat, decades underground, they all warp magnetic memory. But these hadn't been destroyed. They'd been preserved, tucked into metal tins, wrapped in clothing, buried deliberately, not discarded. The audio was faint, distorted in places, but what it revealed shook even the most seasoned agents. The first tape was Eli's promise. It began with silence, then breathing. A child's voice, soft and hesitant. "If you find this, we're not far." A pause, shuffling, the creak of wooden boards. "We hear Mom at night, but she doesn't hear us." Then static, and what sounded like the click of a flashlight being turned off. Tape 2 was Sarah's blank. Her voice was higher, brighter, but strained. There were moments where she seemed to be reciting something, like a script, or a set of instructions. "We can't leave yet, not till he says, but I wrote down where the door is." A faint rustle of paper, a gasp, then whispered, "He doesn't like when we talk too loud." Silence, then a thud, sudden, heavy. Then the tape cuts out. The third tape was the hardest to listen to. Noah's. It began with a song, out of tune, off key, but unmistakably a lullaby. "Go to sleep, little star. Mama's not very far." He sang for 13 seconds, then stopped, then whispered something almost unintelligible. "The bear sees everything." That line repeated twice, then nothing. The audio team enhanced the tape. They isolated background noise. Behind Noah's voice they found layers. Clicks, a low hum, the sound of dripping water, and beneath it all a second voice, adult, male, barely audible. Only 2 words were clear. "Not yet." The FBI brought in linguistic experts, voice analysts, behavioral profilers. They compared the audio to dozens of known voices in Missouri, missing persons databases, known predators, past suspects from the area. No match, not even close. They couldn't say who the man was. But they were certain of 2 things. 1. The children weren't alone when they recorded the tapes. 2. The tapes weren't made in 1981. They were made later, years later. Evidence from the tape quality and background noise suggested mid to late 1980s, possibly 1988. That meant for at least 7 years after they disappeared, the Avery triplets were alive. Somewhere. Being held. Controlled. Coached. The implications were devastating. For the FBI. For the town. For Margaret. But it also reignited something long dead. The case file. Detective Charles Kinney, now retired and living in Illinois, drove back to Hannibal the moment he heard. He hadn't spoken about the Avery case in nearly 20 years, but the voice on the tape pulled him back like a tide. He visited Margaret first. They didn't talk much. She just played him 1 tape. Noah's. When it ended, she said only, "You missed something, back then." And Kinney nodded. He spent the next 2 days walking the backyard. He paced the perimeter, stood in the shed for hours, laid down on the floor, closed his eyes, and listened. Then, on the 3rd day, he called the FBI and said, "Check the foundation." Agents returned with equipment. They scanned the concrete base beneath the shed. It was hollow. Underneath, they found a crawl space. Small, cramped, lined with rotting insulation, and 3 initials scratched into the wooden beam. E+S+N. No one knew how long it had been there, but they knew who had carved it. And suddenly, the bear made sense. The one always sitting on the windowsill, always facing the yard. It hadn't been decoration. It had been a signal, a lookout. The triplets had seen something that night, or someone. They hadn't been taken from the house. They had left. Willingly? Coerced? No one could say yet. But one thing was clear. They'd gone into the shed. And something or someone had kept them there. For years. The town erupted again. News vans returned. Headlines flared. Triplets may have lived for years after vanishing. Voice from the past breaks case open. Who was the man whispering "not yet"? But the bigger question loomed. If they were alive in 1988, where were they now? No remains had been found. No further tapes. No sightings. Just three voices, floating up from the dirt, calling out from 30 years ago. And now? The bear was facing the house again. Margaret had moved it. She said she was waiting for something. The Polaroid camera found beneath the shed floorboards was rusted, broken, and water-damaged. Its flash mechanism was dead. The lens cracked through the center. But when the forensic team removed the cartridge inside, they found one undeveloped frame still intact. Just one. They didn't expect it to yield anything. But after days in a lab, with heat stabilization and digital scanning, an image emerged. It wasn't perfect. Fuzzy around the edges. Colors bled. The light uneven, like from a single, weak bulb. But the center of the photo was clear. 3 children seated on a wooden floor, arms wrapped around each other, wide-eyed, barefoot. Noah's raincoat, Sarah's flower hoodie, Eli's red rocket patch. And behind them, partially obscured by shadow, was a man, half-turned, only one eye visible, face soft with blur but posture unmistakably adult. His hand rested on Sarah's shoulder. And that hand, large, calloused, with a pale scar across the knuckles, became the focus of the entire investigation. Facial recognition failed. The resolution was too poor. But the scar that was unique. So the FBI turned to older files. Suspects from 1981. Men who lived near Hannibal. Men with records, with grudges, with access. They re-examined names long dismissed, checked military records, hospital admissions, job sites, parole reports, insurance claims. And then they found him. Roger Dempsey, a name that had appeared in the original 1981 case file briefly. He'd been a handyman in the area. Worked 2 houses down from the Averys on the week the Triplets vanished. No arrest record. No witnesses. Just a short note in Detective Kinney's log. Tall man, late 30s, left job site May 12 without notice. No one had followed up. Now, in 2011 they did. Dempsey was no longer in Missouri. He'd moved to Wyoming in 1984. Lived alone in a trailer outside Lander. Never married. No children. But in 1992, he'd checked into an ER with a crushed left hand. Industrial accident. Resulted in scarring across the knuckles. The FBI compared photos. The scar matched. They flew to Wyoming. Arrived at Dempsey's home at 7:42 a.m. on a Thursday. He was gone. Neighbors said he'd packed up 2 nights prior. Left a note on the door. Gone to Colorado for work. Don't wait. But he hadn't gone to Colorado. He'd vanished. Again. A manhunt began. His photo hit the news. Person of interest in Avery Triplets case. People started calling in. And then, Margaret received a letter. It was postmarked 2 days before the photo went public. No return address. Just her name, written in block letters. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No greeting. No signature. Only one sentence. I kept them safe as long as I could. She handed it to the FBI without a word. They fingerprinted it. Nothing. The paper was clean. But the phrasing raised questions. Kept them safe. As long as he could. What did that mean? Had he rescued them from someone else? Had he been a captor? Or a protector? The tapes didn't sound like safety. But neither did death. And still there were no remains. No confirmed sightings after 1988. No bodies. Only echoes. Then came the second photo. It arrived anonymously at the St. Louis field office. Same camera type. Same size. Same children. But this time they were outside. Standing in front of what looked like an old barn. Holding signs made of cardboard. Eli's read, "We're okay." Sarah's, "Don't stop looking." Noah's had no words. Just a red handprint. Behind them stood the same man, full view now. Square jaw. Work jacket. Scare across left hand. Roger Dempsey. There was no denying it. The photo had been taken in broad daylight. And the field behind them had power lines. One agent traced those lines, matched the topography. It led to an abandoned property in southern Montana, a cattle farm sold at auction in 1991. They sent a team. What they found was dust, decay, and one concrete slab behind the barn. Beneath it, shallow buried, was a box. Inside, another tape, dated 1989, and this time, the voice was not a child. It was a man. Deep, calm. He said, "If someone finds this, please know I tried. I fed them. I taught them. I didn't hurt them. But they wanted to leave. I couldn't let that happen. Not yet." The tape ended, and for the first time, the FBI changed their wording. The Avery triplets were no longer classified as missing. They were now presumed abducted and held. Not once, but twice. By two different men, or by one whose intentions changed? No one knew. Roger Dempsey was never found. No trace. No digital footprint. Nothing since the day he disappeared from Lander. But the image remained. That photograph, 3 children, 1 man, and a red handprint now lived in the FBI's archives. Under a new case file, marked Avery, 1981 open. Active, no closure. And in Margaret's home, the bear on the windowsill now faced the garden again, not watching, but remembering. Some places forget. Brick fades. Pint peels. Grass grows over old footsteps. Towns move on. People, too. But gardens remember. Margaret Avery's garden was not beautiful. It had no symmetry, no clever landscaping. Just uneven patches of soil, tangled rhubarb, a few sunflowers too stubborn to die. But beneath it all was memory. And in the fall of 2011, that memory began to speak. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even clear. But it came in fragments. Like the way soil crumbles differently when it's been disturbed. Like how roots curl around something that wasn't always there. Like how, in the right light, the faded outline of 3 small footprints can still press against your eyes. Margaret started digging again that October. She didn't ask permission this time. Didn't file paperwork. Didn't tell the sheriff. She just went out with a lantern and a trowel and knelt beside the broken fence post. That's where she found the shoe. Children's size, 11. Blue canvas. Frayed laces. Noah's. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She carried it into the house and placed it beside the tin boxes. The next day she found Sarah's bracelet. 2 days later, Eli's rocket pin. Every object unearthed was like a breath, like a whisper rising from 30 years of silence. She wasn't the only one listening anymore. The FBI brought in cadaver dogs, ground scanners, botanists. They found something strange. The soil beneath the garden was layered, not just with time, but with intention. Someone had buried things in intervals, years apart, always in the same triangle: shed, rhubarb patch, sunflower mound. Each site yielded small objects: a spoon, a child's notebook, a Polaroid film wrapper, and finally, a lock of hair. Blonde, braided, tied with a pink thread. Sarah's WW. Still no bodies. Still no remains. Just a growing museum of things that shouldn't have survived but did. Because the garden didn't forget. Neither did Margaret. She began writing things down again. In a journal. Leather-bound. She called it the House of 4. Inside, she wrote everything she remembered from that spring of 1981. Smells. Sounds. The way Eli hummed when brushing his teeth. The way Sarah always lined her dolls before bed. The way Noah never cried, just blinked slowly when scared. She wrote what she wished she'd said. What she dreamed, she still could. She included the dreams, especially the one that returned in November. The triplets at the back gate, in winter coats. Not smiling, not afraid, just waiting. Behind them, the bear. Larger than life. Eyes dark, arms open. Then Margaret would wake. The case never closed. Dempsey was never found. No charges filed. no verdict, no peace. But something changed in the town. On the 30th anniversary of their disappearance, Hannibal did something it hadn't done in 3 decades. It remembered. The local high school held a candlelight vigil. 3 chairs placed at the front. Empty, but lit. A girl named April born, the year the triplets vanished, read from Margaret's journal. We didn't get to watch them grow up, but we can grow things for them now. The town started planting. Not monuments, not marble, just gardens. 3 across Hannibal, each with sunflowers, each with a single statue of a bear facing outward. Margaret didn't attend the vigil, but she watched from the window. That night she lit 3 candles, set them on the windowsill, the bear between them, and for the first time in years she opened the bedroom window. Let the cold in. Let the silence breathe. She didn't expect them to return. She just wanted them to know she was still listening, and the garden was still remembering.